"I just wish there was some way to go around to every one of them," Elvis said wistfully, gazing out the window of Graceland at the crowd of fans gathered on the lawn. It was June 1957, and Elvis Presley was at the height of his fame. But the constant attention and lack of privacy were starting to take their toll. Vernon Presley put a comforting hand on his son's shoulder. "I know it's hard, son, but think of all you've accomplished. Those people out there love you."
Elvis sighed.
"I know, Daddy. I'm grateful, I really am. It's just, sometimes I wish things could be simpler, you know? Like it used to be back in Tupelo or when we first moved to Memphis." Gladys came up and hugged Elvis from behind. "Oh, my baby boy. I worry about you so. All this traveling, barely sleeping or eating right. It's not good for you." "Now, Gladys, the boy will be just fine," Vernon reassured her. "Colonel Parker is taking good care of him. Elvis is tougher than he looks. He can handle it." Elvis gave his mother a kiss on the cheek. "Mama, I'll be okay, I promise. This is my dream come true. Everything I ever wanted." But even as he said the words, Elvis felt a pang of doubt. Was this really what he wanted? The sold-out shows, the screaming girls, the movies, it was exciting, sure. But lately it had started to feel more like a gilded cage than the freedom he craved. "I better get ready. I have to be at the studio for wardrobe soon," Elvis said abruptly. He gave his parents one last hug before heading upstairs to his room. As he passed the porch, he could hear the excited chatter of the fans outside, calling his name. For a moment, he was tempted to go out and talk to them, just bask in their adoration. But he resisted the urge. It would only make it harder to leave. In his bedroom, Elvis flopped down on the bed, suddenly exhausted. He thought about the girl he'd just met, Anita Wood. She was beautiful and sweet, and being with her felt comfortingly normal compared to the circus his life had become. Elvis knew Colonel Parker would say Anita was a distraction, that he needed to focus on his career. But maybe that was the problem. Lately his whole life had become nothing but his career, a never-ending cycle of movies, concerts, and public appearances with no time for anything or anyone else. Elvis's mind wandered back to his recent trip to Biloxi and the girl he'd spent time with there, June Wanico. Things had felt so natural and easy with June, almost like he was a regular guy again instead of Elvis Presley, famous singer and movie star. They had connected on a deep level, and he'd even confided in her about his secret hopes and dreams for the future. To serve in the military, get married, maybe have a family someday, a normal life. But Colonel Parker had been furious when he found out about the trip and the newspaper interviews Elvis and June had done. It was too revealing, the colonel said, and threatened to undermine Elvis's image. Image, that's all he cares about, Elvis thought bitterly. Sometimes he felt more like a product or a commodity than a real person with needs and desires of his own. Elvis thought about his upcoming movie Jailhouse Rock. He was excited about it. The script was good and it would give him a chance to show his acting chops. But he knew it meant months spent in Hollywood, far away from his family and friends in Memphis. He loved performing, but he hated the loneliness and isolation that came with fame. He wished he could figure out a way to have balance, to hold on to himself and what really mattered. Unbidden, Gladys's face floated into Elvis's mind. He knew his success thrilled his mother but also terrified her in some ways. She was so proud of him but also scared of losing him, scared that the whirlwind of fame would tear him away from her, physically and emotionally. Elvis felt tears prick his eyes. His mama was his anchor, his truest confidant and supporter. If he lost her, Elvis didn't know what he would do. He said a silent prayer that she would stay healthy, that they would have many more years together. He couldn't imagine his life without her steadfast love. A knock on the door startled Elvis out of his reverie. It was his cousin Jean. "Hey Elvis, the colonel just called. The car will be here to take you to the studio in 10 minutes. Elvis took a deep breath and stood up. He straightened his shirt collar and ran a comb through his hair. It was time to put on his public face, to be the Elvis everyone expected him to be, energetic, charismatic, always ready to please. The private doubts and yearnings would have to wait. He had a job to do. As the car whisked Elvis away from Graceland, He gazed out the window at the passing streets of Memphis, the only home he'd ever really known. Though part of him was eager to get to the studio and throw himself into work, he couldn't help but feel wistful. He knew his life was changing faster than he could keep up with sometimes. All he could do was hold on tight to the things that mattered most and pray that fame wouldn't change him too much from the inside out. The months passed in a whirlwind of movie making, recording sessions and brief trips home to Memphis whenever he could manage it. Jailhouse Rock wrapped up and Elvis threw himself into promoting it, doing interviews and public appearances. The film was a smash hit, further cementing his status as a multi-talented superstar. Elvis was proud of his work in it, but a part of him rankled at the way it played into his public persona as a threatening, sexy rebel. He knew he was so much more than that, but would he ever get the chance to show it? Things with Anita Wood were still going strong and Elvis began to let himself dream about a future with her. Maybe after his next movie he would take some time off, really get to know her and see if they had a shot at something lasting. The idea filled him with nervous excitement. Elvis had always struggled to open up to others and trust them fully with his heart. But something about Anita made him want to try. All those hopes came crashing down the day Elvis got his draft notice. He knew it had been coming and had even looked forward to the chance to serve his country in a small way. But now the reality of it left him feeling lost. What would happen to his career, his family, his relationship with Anita while he was away? Would the public forget about him as quickly as they had embraced him? Colonel Parker was in a frenzy, working every angle to try to get Elvis a cushy assignment that would allow him to still record and make the occasional public appearance or film. But Elvis put his foot down. If he was going to serve, he wanted to be treated like any other soldier. No special privileges. The colonel thought he was nuts to potentially throw his career away like that, but Elvis stood firm. It was the right thing to do. Saying goodbye to his parents before shipping out was one of the hardest things Elvis had ever done. Gladys clung to him and wept, as if she sensed some threat even beyond the normal dangers of military service. "My baby," she kept whispering. "Come back to me. I couldn't take it if anything happened to you." Elvis held her tight and promised he would stay safe. Vernon shook his hand, man to man, too choked up to say much. "I'm proud of you, son," was all he could manage. "We'll be right here waiting for you." At first, being in the Army was a relief for Elvis in some ways. Sure, the physical training and discipline took some getting used to, but there was also a simplicity to Army life that was refreshing after the chaos and pressure of his skyrocketing fame. For the first time in years, Elvis felt almost anonymous, just another soldier in uniform, doing his duty. Oh, his fellow recruits and COs knew who he was, of course, and he got his fair share of ribbing and special attention because of it. But they also came to respect Elvis for never asking for special privileges, for humbly going through the same training and hardships that they all did. Elvis found himself bonding with these young men from all walks of life in a way he never really had before. In the Army, no one cared how many records you had sold or how many girls screamed for you. All that mattered was how you carried yourself and looked out for your fellow soldiers. Elvis took great pride in measuring up to that standard. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were times, especially at night lying in his bunk, when the old doubts and insecurities would creep in. Being away from performing and the spotlight for so long made Elvis wonder if he was losing his touch, his hard-won stardom. He avidly read the newspaper and magazine articles people sent him, hungry for any news about the music scene back home and his competition. Elvis knew rationally that he had been firmly established as a major star before his stint in the Army, but he still worried that some new hotshot would come along and replace him in the hearts of fickle teenagers. Getting rare letters and phone calls from Anita helped keep him going. She remained faithful to him, turning down offers and opportunities in order to wait for her man. Her steadfast love and belief in him was a balm to Elvis's soul, though a part of him felt guilty for the difficult and uncertain position he had put her in. Would she really wait for him for 2 whole years while he finished his service? Could he even ask that of her? Elvis tried not to dwell on those questions, instead focusing on pouring his heart out to Anita in long letters and promising her the moon when he got back. Those promises turned to ashes in Elvis's mouth when he got the call about his mother's failing health. Gladys had been in poor health for years, struggling with depression, weight issues, and alcohol abuse, the pressures of Elvis's fame taking their toll on her. But now something was seriously wrong, and Elvis knew with a sinking feeling that he had to get to her as soon as possible. Seeing his vibrant, beautiful mother reduced to a pale shell of herself in the hospital bed broke Elvis's heart. He sat by her bedside for hours, holding her hand and singing to her softly like she had once done for him as a child. Elvis prayed desperately for her to get better, bargaining with God and promising to be a better son if only she would recover. But it was not to be. Gladys passed away on August 14, 1958, plunging Elvis into despair. He had always been extremely close to his mother, relying on her for love and moral support. Losing her felt like losing a part of himself. Even the bittersweet news of his forthcoming promotion to sergeant felt hollow with Gladys gone. The only small solace was that Vernon and his grandmother Minnie would now be allowed to be housed near Elvis's army base in Germany. At least Elvis would have some part of his family close to lean on as he tried to soldier on. But Germany was no picnic. Sure, Elvis enjoyed some of the perks that came with being a world-famous soldier stationed abroad, the fancy homes, the flashy cars. But mostly he felt desperately lonely and adrift without his mother as his anchor. When Elvis was introduced to amphetamines by a fellow soldier, he eagerly partook, hoping the little pills would give him the energy to power through his grief and the grueling days. But it was a dangerous road. Elvis began relying on the uppers more and more just to get through long days of training and mind-numbing routine. His volatile moods would swoop from bursts of manic activity to anguished breakdowns over his mother. His concerned friends and family didn't know what to make of it. Vernon was lost in his own haze of sorrow, unequipped to really help his struggling son. Meeting Priscilla was a bright spot for Elvis during this dark time. Her youth and beauty were a welcome distraction from the pain. Elvis poured his energy into wooing and seducing the innocent 14-year-old, finding it all too easy to impress her with his fame and maturity. But a part of him knew it wasn't an equal or healthy relationship. Elvis held all the power, and he wielded it to bend Priscilla to his will, molding her into his idealized version of the perfect, obedient girlfriend. The normal pangs of grief and guilt Elvis felt over betraying Anita, who was faithfully waiting for him back home, were dulled somewhat by the drugs coursing through his system and the thrill of having a shiny new toy in Priscilla. But the army stint couldn't last forever. With his hard-won sergeant stripes and a slightly more respectable public image, Elvis was finally a free man again in the spring of 1960. Part of him was desperately grateful to put the difficult, heartbreaking years of service behind him and get back to what he did best, making music and entertaining his adoring fans. But another part of Elvis was still deeply bruised and disoriented. Losing his mother had unmoored him in ways he was only beginning to understand. Could he really just pick his life and career back up where he had left off, as if nothing had fundamentally changed? Elvis wasn't sure of the answer anymore. Meanwhile, Colonel Parker had been busy laying the groundwork for Elvis's return. He had expertly played the Hollywood game, using Elvis's buoyed public image to demand higher salaries and profit points for his musical's upcoming projects. Parker's backroom string-pulling ensured that the world was salivating for Elvis's reemergence, primed to embrace him as a more mature, respectable mainstream star. Even RCA had been forced to play ball, signing new contracts with increased royalties and reduced recording commitment tensions. To the public, it would look like Elvis had stepped smoothly from the army back into his rightful place as the king of entertainment. But behind the scenes, Parker had been working overtime to secure every advantage and remove any obstacles to Elvis's continued success and profitability. Of course, only Elvis himself knew the internal struggles he was still facing. He put on a brave face for the public, flashing his trademark grin and talking eagerly about upcoming projects. But inside, Elvis was floundering. He tried to lose himself in his work, throwing his all into recording more mature, ambitious music and preparing for his big post-army movie debut. The pills helped him keep up the grueling pace Parker set for him, but they also increased his paranoia and mood swings. Elvis picked fights with the Memphis Mafia over minor infractions, lashing out in hurt and anger when all he really wanted was comfort and reassurance. As the fog of grief and addiction closed in around him, Elvis's thoughts drifted more and more to the fans who had remained so devotedly steadfast through his army years. Night after night, they still showed up at the gates of Graceland, screaming his name and welcoming him home as if no time had passed at all. Their unchanging love and loyalty was the one constant Elvis felt like he could count on. He wished there was some way he could repay them, connect with them on a deeper level beyond just signing autographs and posing for pictures. But that was a dangerous road too. Elvis knew he couldn't afford to fully be himself with the fans, knew he had to maintain some professional distance and mystique. Being Elvis Presley was now such a carefully constructed persona, one that he could never fully drop without risking everything he had built. So instead, Elvis retreated into the comfortingly artificial world of Hollywood, surrounding himself with acting and music and movie sets. They could numb all the troubling anxieties over whether he was still relevant, still beloved. Somehow, Elvis got through those first difficult months back in the spotlight. His natural charisma and talent took over when the cameras were rolling. But off-screen, his bad habits and inner demons still lurked under the surface. Fistfights, shotgun shooting sprees, impromptu gallivants to Vegas, Elvis's erratic behavior became the norm, and his frustrated inner circle had no idea how to rein him in. Surprisingly, it was Elvis's decision to decorate his garish new Graceland mansion that finally seemed to ground him for a bit. Pouring his money and creative energy into the kitschy castle he had promised his mother felt healing. Every over-the-top piece of furniture, every plushy carpet was a tribute to Gladys, an attempt to build the luxurious home he had always dreamed of providing for her. Elvis knew many would sneer at his gaudy, lowbrow taste, but he didn't care. Let them think it was tacky. For Elvis, it felt like building a grand mausoleum where his mother's memory could live on forever. He needed that tangible, permanent piece of her. Slowly, as Elvis settled into his strange new life as a bona fide adult superstar, he began to wrestle more with what he wanted his legacy to be. Was he content to just crank out forgettable travelogue movies and increasingly saccharine soundtrack ballads? The fans still ate it all up, but the old rebellious rocker in Elvis sometimes rebelled. He ached to sink his teeth into heftier roles and take more risks with his music. But Colonel Parker was having none of it. They had a winning formula now, and he wasn't about to let his prize pony veer off into moody, preachy art. So Elvis sublimated his creative frustrations into bedding an endless stream of starlets and beauty queens, losing himself in their youthful bodies and pliant admiration. If he couldn't express himself artistically, maybe he could find some escape and ego boost through sex. And when his whirlwind marriage to Priscilla was falling apart, Elvis could numb the pain of that fresh failure with more drugs and more women. But deep down, he knew it was all an act, a distraction from the gnawing emptiness inside. As the 1960s rolled on and a new breed of rock star emerged, dangerous, political, experimental, Elvis felt increasingly like a relic, stuck in a numbing cycle of mediocre movies and meandering tours. He still put on a thrilling live show, still made the girls scream. But privately, Elvis was hurting, haunted by the sense that he had squandered his gifts and betrayed the potential he'd shown in those early, incendiary years. Sometimes, in the still of night, Elvis's thoughts would drift back to his stillborn twin, Jesse Garin. How would things have been different if he'd lived? If Elvis had grown up with a brother by his side? Maybe they would have been partners, a duo that could have shared the joys and burdens of fame. But Elvis knew that was a childish fantasy. In reality, he was alone with his demons and regrets. The '68 comeback special was a brief glimmer of the old fire, a tantalizing glimpse of the Elvis that could have been if he hadn't been stifled by Hollywood and his own inertia for so long. In the throes of those thrilling jam sessions with his original band, dressed in black leather, snarling and raw, Elvis felt truly alive again, connected to his deepest musical roots. The response was rapturous, enough to stoke his ego and make him believe, however fleetingly, that a real revival was possible. But it was sadly not to be. The '70s were a slow, painful slide into drug-fueled decline and self-parody. The jumpsuits got more garish, the crowds more sparse and less feverish. Elvis's body bloated as his spirit withered. But still he soldiered on, too proud to admit defeat, too entrenched in the Elvis Presley myth to change course now. Occasionally, in his darkest, most stoned moments, Elvis fantasized about faking his own death, escaping the crushing pressures of being himself. He could almost taste the freedom of leaving Elvis behind, of being anonymous, unburdened by legacy. But he knew he could never really do it. Walking away would mean abandoning the fans who had sustained him for so long, failing to live up to the hopes his beloved mother had pinned on him. And so Elvis pushed on, through one more tawdry Vegas residency, one more deadening tour, until it all finally caught up with him on that fateful August day in 1977. The boy who had dreamed of so much more than being a truck driver died as a sad, bloated caricature of what he had been. But in that darkness, there was still a spark of grace, the humble humanity of a poor Southern kid who had been blessed and burdened with an extraordinary gift. A mama's boy who had only ever wanted to do right by her. In the end, maybe that's all any of us can hope for, to be remembered for touching people, for doing our sincere best even as we inevitably falter. Elvis's life was a cautionary tale, but also an inspiration. He showed us the intoxicating power of raw talent married to relentless drive, and also the dangers of believing your own myth, of losing yourself in pursuit of an ever grander illusion. Most of all, he was a testament to the enduring power of music to elevate and transport us, to express the yearnings and contradictions of the human heart in all its messy glory. In that bittersweet light, maybe Elvis's truest legacy was simple and profound. He dared to dream big, reached amazing heights, and even in crashing back to earth, never stopped wanting, desperately, to be loved tender.